Welcome to this session of AIJC 2020. We have an interpreter, a French interpreter for the session. So please select your language, go to the global icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen, click English or French, and then mute the main channel so that you only get one channel. Please use the Q&A function for your questions. Thank you very much and enjoy the session.
Hello and welcome to this panel that we have this afternoon that we'll be discussing on terrorism and insurgency. My name is Amelia Martha Nashtimbo, and I'm joining you from Pointe-Noire, the economic capital of the Republic of Congo. And on our panel today, we'll have two people. One is David Dembele, who'll be joining us later, hopefully. We also have Mame Diarra Diop. Like you heard earlier, this session is coming to you in both French and English, and there's interpretation for French and English. You can choose your preferred language by choosing the sound that you have. So we have Mama. Do you want to say hello, Mama?
Hello, everyone. Hello, how are you? Hello from Bamako in Mali.
What's the weather like in Bamako this afternoon?
Well, it's very hot here. It's weird because we're in the cold season, but it's quite hot these days, a lot of sun.
A lot of sunshine, and it's actually it's the same in
Yeah.
Brazzaville where I am. And someone was complaining maybe this is the effects of climate change, the evidence of climate change. Very hot, yes. So when I spoke to you earlier, you told me that at the end of this session, you want people to understand the takeaway message is the consciousness that we need when we are approaching journalism and the professionalism that we need. Would you like to expound on that?
Okay, I'm a radio journalist. I've been working as a journalist for like 15 years, since 22. And for me, being a journalist is a great responsibility. So you will need to be professional in every aspect of your work. You know, when giving information, when collecting information, when sourcing information, when having sources. So for me, it's a daily duty. You know, there are many journalists. Everybody now wants to be journalists. You have those social media. Everyone is a video man. Everyone is giving information on social media platform. But journalists have to remember that they have rules to respect. This is why for me, it's very important, no matter the subject you're approaching, you really need to think, am I doing my job as I should do it? Am I being professional? Yes.
Thank you very much. For those who've just joined us, this session is going to be 1 hour. So at the top of the hour, we'll be done. We hope to have at least 20 minutes of presentations from our panelists, and then later on, we'll take questions, comments, and suggestions from those of you who are attending. So prepare your questions in advance, and hopefully we'll dive into them. So if I can go on now to do a formal introduction of our panelists, Mame Diarra Diop. She's a journalist producer. I'm going to read directly from the bio that you submitted to the participants of the AIJC. She's working with Mikado FM, which is a United Nations radio in Mali, and she presents news and a magazine, and has been coordinating editorial staff since 2016. She has more than 15 years of professional experience, like she just mentioned, and she has collaborated with international media such as RFI or RFI, Afrique.com, Africa International, before taking on the editorial direction of the online magazine, which is journaldumali.com from 2010 to 2016. Um, and the other details, it's quite a lengthy bio. If you'd like to see the details, you can go on the website at AIJC for that.
Yeah.
So I'll start by asking you a question. When you were approached to speak on a panel on terrorism and insurgency, what came to your mind immediately?
Oh, I was like such a subject. I mean, terrorism issue is a daily subject for us. We are in Mali, we are in the Sahel region, and for a few years now, we are facing terrorist attacks. We are facing a lot of insecurity, insurgency, rebel groups. So it's a familiar topic to me.
A very
So I was
familiar
like,
topic.
okay, I can maybe, yeah, it's a very familiar topic. Just to be precise, like 2 days ago, we had an attack against Malian soldiers that were killed and civilians in the center of the country. So it's something that we daily deal with.
Right. And
Yeah.
do you feel like we cover we cover the problem, we go to the root of the problem, or we always cover just the results? How deep have reporters and journalists gone into uncovering exactly why we have these recurrent attacks?
Well, it's a very good question because when covering this question, we usually covers attacks, and how many deaths people, what was the reaction, international reaction, communicate from the army, and we very rarely go to the roots of the problems. For example, if you talk about investigating on terrorism and insurgency, you need to know the geographical organization of this terrorist group. You need to go to the roots. What had made these groups to expand in the Sahel? What is the difference between terrorism and insurgency, even if it tends to be very linked? You also have, all
I
those
could cut you
social
short right
aspects.
there. Can you tell
Yeah.
us the difference between terrorism and insurgency, in your view?
Well, I mean, it's the line is very, very, very thin against both because you have at the same time both phenomenon happens at the same areas. You have those insurgent group, which later on will join bigger terrorist group. It starts with weak states and weak army groups that are forming on the ground, doing action, going into insurgency, and then later on it goes bigger. It goes bigger. They join bigger groups. So the line is very thin between the both. I'm not a specialist, an expert to say the real exact separation between both, but I can explain what links to what brings a phenomenon to another.
Okay, so you are a leader of, you have a staff of people that are working under you where you're working right now, Mikado FM.
Yeah.
And I understand that in
Mhm.
most media houses, traditional media houses, there's usually not a budget for doing investigation, or there's simply not the time. We just
Mhm.
want to do stories very quickly and we go. And for a situation like these attacks that keep recurring, have you had any intentionality in giving time or giving resources to see that at least some reporters uncover some of the truths of what is happening, why the attacks keep happening, or who is perpetrating these attacks? What's been your experience with that?
Mhm. Okay, I have to recall that I work in Mikado, which is the UN radio in Mali, which is part of the UN mission in Mali. So we have very special rules when covering these issues. For example, going on the field, it's not very easy, but we did it once. We once sent a reporter in the north of the country. He spent a whole week with the army, with the French Operation Barkhane soldiers, following their action on the ground on how to track terrorists, how to code them. So it happens, but very rarely. We try to do it. It's not very easy all the time. It's not just a budget question. It's just more about security of journalists. Can they go or can they not go? If we have the permission or the authorization to do it, we do it. We have journalists who are keen to go on the field to investigate, but it's not a daily. It's not every day.
Okay, so as a journalist who comes from East Africa, and maybe we don't usually have the same kind of attacks that we have in the Sahel region, do you feel like the continent maybe helps you in a way in covering these stories or sharing the stories that you cover? How would you want us to support these stories on terrorism and insurgency?
Well, I think people need, regarding journalists, they need to be more, how to say, more trained about this question. Maybe they would need to join some network, or maybe they would need to go in other country and see how this country covers the terrorist issue. As you know, these groups are everywhere. For example, you have Boko Haram in Nigeria. And last year, I was participating to a workshop in Niger, in Niamey, when we had a lot of journalists coming from all countries, and there were very much differences in the way people investigate and cover. For example, one of them was investigating on the Lake Chad basin, the Lake Chad, which is having more and more terrorist group around, which are keeping people from, fishing, fishermen doing their fishing. So there are many ways in covering, and I think they should be given the possibility to go on the fields and experience new ways of covering rather than staying in their newsroom, giving attacks and victims and all these things.
Yeah. So, in your view, do you think it would be easier for maybe foreign journalists to cover the insurgencies or other stories in Mali, or it would be easier for Malian reporters to actually do the reporting?
I think it's
Hello,
easier for
Amelia.
foreign journalists because
I think David has just
someone is
joined us.
speaking.
Welcome, David. Yes.
Welcome. I'm so sorry to be late. I was a bit troubled about my connection.
No worries, no problem. We're glad to have you. We had already started off with Madame Amediara, and she was sharing with us stories from Mali. And
Bonjour, David.
Ça va?
Ça va? Oui, ça va. Okay, so should I go on or should I?
Yes, please go on. I had
speak?
asked you a question about, do you think, yes, you can go ahead and answer, and then later on we can also go to David, who has a presentation.
Okay. For me personally, I think it's easier for foreign journalists to investigate or cover this issue. I can give an example. I can give an example of when there was this crisis in 20. Yeah, the sound is bad.
Well, I've seen a very interesting question that has just come in, and I'm going to share the question with you, Mame. Are you ready to continue with the question that we had earlier? I was asking if you find that you still remember the question, so you can go ahead.
Yeah, you were saying, was it easy for foreign journalists or Malian journalists to cover this issue? And I would say
yes, and by foreign I mean not just maybe like Western journalists coming from, say, Europe or America. I also mean African journalists who are coming from the continent.
Well, I cannot speak for other African journalists. I can speak for Malian journalists. I know the problem they have to have access to information, to have access to information from the army, from authorities, and also from, political personalities. It's not easy, and it's even easier for these journalists coming from Europe, coming from other countries to have information. It's like they have more credit than us. I don't know why, but this has to change. And I think it's always this professionalism issue. What kind of investigation you do? What kind of article you do? How do you help us understand a phenomenon? How do you help us understand how ISIS is infiltrating now the Al Qaeda and coming in the Malian ground? I mean, there are many questions journalists should touch to get this credit. This is why I can give the example of that political man, Soumaïla Cissé, which has just been released a few days ago. Most of his interviews were given to foreign and Western media, and very less interviews were given to Malian media. It says a lot.
Indeed, you're right. It says a lot. And the question about access to information is not just unique to Mali. I'm currently in Congo Brazzaville, and because it's also part of French-speaking Africa, I find that there's difficulty in accessing information. And most of my colleagues who also come from French-speaking Africa, like Senegal, Cameroon, they also say the same about the difficulties in accessing information, even for simple stories, which makes it even harder for when you're doing investigations. So I wonder if in that domain you have mastered some tricks and tips that you could share. For instance, you've spent 15 years, you're Malian, of course, you're well familiar. I have just been 3 years. I've been in Brazzaville for only 3 years. So what tips and tricks can you share on how to attain information?
Yes, I think attaining information asks to have many sources. For example, in Mali, we have journalists who develop a whole network of sources in the north, even among some rebel groups, to try to get information before army or before official sources. So journalism is not anything else than having a great network of people that can give you information and accurate information at the right time. So those sources also, you need to protect them. You need to be very cautious in giving an information. You need to double or triple check and protect your source. I think that's the trick. And now after that, journalists should be trained and, integrate most networks like African networks, Pan-African networks, and even European networks, get help and finance to be able to do some investigation. These are some ways to do it.
Okay, thank you very much. So there are questions that are coming in, but I'm going to hold them for now, and then I'm going to ask David in 20 minutes to give us a presentation that he had prepared for us. David, are you there?
D'accord, merci. Je dis, déjà, je salue Mme soit là avec nous, Mme Diarra, que j'ai eu l'occasion de rencontrer sur mon parcours de journaliste. Voilà, donc elle a pas mal d'expérience aussi à partager ici, et donc je salue sa présence. Oui, je suis à vous. Si on doit procéder par question-réponse sur la thématique, je suis à vous, Armélia.
Okay, David, I understand that you had a presentation share with us. Are you still going to make that presentation?
Je vais brancher un écouteur, sinon ça avait l'air de... Voilà, je pense que c'est bon? C'est bon, tu me reçois? C'est bon, tu...
Oui.
me reçois?
Yes.
D'accord. Non, j'avais souhaité, effectivement, j'avais souhaité parler de cette expérience que j'ai eue avec mon collègue Moussa Aksar du Niger, qui est un journaliste d'investigation au Niger. Nous avons tous les deux travaillé sur un sujet d'un très grand intérêt. Vous voyez, au niveau du Mali a une...
So if you've just joined us, this is a panel investigating terrorism and insurgency. We're speaking to two journalists who have covered terrorism and insurgency and why it's becoming important for journalists to do that. It's a very important question, especially in the Sahel region. With us, we have David Dembele and we have Nam Diarra, who are speaking to us. David, go ahead.
Hello. Yeah.
Yes, David, donc, I can now hear you.
Je disais, moi, je suis plus, je suis pas à mon bureau et donc c'est un peu compliqué par rapport à la connexion. Je m'en excuse. Et donc, je disais tantôt que cette enquête nous a poussé vraiment à aller voir jusqu'où les communautés au niveau vivant, au niveau des frontières entre le Mali et le Niger, étaient exposées à ce courant-là. Parce que Abu Walid al-Shahraoui, je dois vous dire que c'est le chef de l'État islamique du Grand Sahara. Vous voyez, et ce personnage qui a vu la nécessité, on peut pratiquement dire que c'est il est le premier, la première figure à prêter allégeance à l'État islamique. Et donc, il a vu cette nécessité de créer son réseau au niveau du Sahara et avec comme arrière-base cette zone frontalière entre le Mali et le Niger. Au niveau du Niger, vous voyez que les populations qui y vivent crient l'absence de l'État. C'est-à-dire qu'il y a une certaine faiblesse que ce terroriste a pu exploiter. C'est-à-dire que l'État n'est pas présent dans tous les domaines. Vous voyez, les services sociaux de base, les gens ont besoin d'emploi, les gens ont besoin d'eau, les gens ont besoin d'aller à l'école. Et voilà des services sociaux de base qui n'existent pas de façon régulière dans cette zone, notamment pour le Mali. Il s'agit de Ménaka, la région de Ménaka, et pour le Niger. Pour ça, Assa, mon collègue, a pu se rendre, et c'est vraiment la zone de Tilaberi. Et vous voyez que les populations connaissent les mêmes réalités et les groupes djihadistes utilisent cette faiblesse-là, cette absence de l'État pour essayer d'approcher les populations et leur offrir de l'emploi, leur offrir tout ce qui est vital pour la stabilité, pour la vie des communautés. Et c'est dans ce cadre que les populations se sont vues obligées de partiser avec ces courants. Dans l'enquête, vous verrez que nous rencontrons pas mal de sources à ces niveaux, parce que nous aussi, ça nous a amené à, personnellement, ça m'a amené à épouser une certaine attitude sur le terrain, déjà avant d'aller sur le terrain, parce qu'il fallait aller enquêter sur comment est-ce que ce groupe djihadiste dirigé par M. Abou Wali al-Sharawi, comment est-ce qu'il a pu intégrer la population. Je vous ai parlé de l'absence de l'État dans ces localités-là. Donc, c'est une fibre sur laquelle ce personnage a joué pour pouvoir s'incruster et à même recruter des combattants, vous voyez. Parce que quand vous regardez, comparer un peu la solde du soldat malien à un peu des gens qui se font enrôler dans ces groupes djihadistes, vous verrez que ceux-là qui se font enrôler dans les groupes djihadistes sont mieux lotis. Ils ont tous les conforts, ils ont un salaire qui peut quadrupler celui du soldat, du soldat malien. Et donc, ça fait qu'il y a cette tentation. D'un côté, l'État est absent, et de l'autre côté, il y a des opportunités que ces djihadistes et autres que la plupart des attaques que la frontière entre le Mali connaît. Je me dis que c'est vraiment une zone enregistrée le nombre d'attaques terroristes.
David, if I can ask you a question.
Yeah. Oui, il n'y a pas de souci.
While doing the scale of investigations that you have started, do you always feel like you have enough support? Because the story is too huge, I understand, and it's covering a very big region. If you could get support to cover the length of the story, what kind of support would you need?
Je disais que pour nous rendre sur le terrain, il fallait réfléchir. Vous voyez, un journaliste, c'est aussi ça. Il ne peut pas vous jeter dans la gueule de l'eau. C'est une zone extrêmement dangereuse où le journaliste peut être vu en espion. Et donc, il fallait, dans un premier temps, réunir les conditions de sécurité possibles. Vous voyez, dans un pays où la sécurité du citoyen n'est pas garantie. Et ça, on le connaît depuis un certain nombre d'années. Vous avez vu comment tout cela a pu jouer sur la déstabilisation de cet État-là. Et donc, il fallait réunir un certain nombre de conditions. Et déjà, pour se rendre sur le terrain, les, les véhicules tombent généralement dans des embuscades, il y a des attentats, la voiture piégée, et qui ont été perpétrés sur sur un nombre important de forêts dans la localité. Et donc, il fallait contourner. Moi, je suis allé carrément je ne suis pas allé directement, parce que pour aller directement à Menaka, il y a une voie directe de Gao, Bamako à Gao, et Gao-Menaka. Donc, cette route, elle est minée, elle n'est pas sécurisée. Et donc, il fallait contourner, passer par le Burkina Faso, rentrer au Niger et venir vers Menaka, dans la zone concernée. Et c'était le tour qu'il fallait faire parce que c'est pas possible de s'y rendre en toute sécurité. Donc, une fois aussi sur le terrain, j'avais déjà décanté le terrain, j'avais pu avoir quelques interlocuteurs sur lesquels je comptais pour vraiment me dire c'est des gens qui y vivent. Et ils savent que par moment, ils ont la visite de, voilà, de ces gens-là qui veulent les enrôler, qui leur proposent de l'emploi, qui leur proposent de l'eau potable, qui leur proposent une meilleure gouvernance. Et donc, ils sont à la merci parce que l'État, de l'autre côté, l'État n'est pas présent. L'État n'est pas présent. Et c'est sur cette fille qu'il joue pour pouvoir effectivement. Et là, il s'agissait exactement d'une communauté, la communauté Peul qui y vit, qui est la communauté majoritaire dans cette localité. Et il fallait s'appuyer sur la communauté Peul. Et vous avez vu comment tout cela a pu se traduire un peu au centre du Mali, où vous avez vu que les Peuls étaient la cible quelque part.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to kind of cut you short there and bring you back to some of the questions that I had prepared for you for this conference. When you were starting out to investigate, David, did you have someone who trained you? Is there training for young Malian reporters or any person who wants to do reporting on terrorism and insurgency to give you the very crucial tips? I mean, you're talking about you have to have these tools, someone to show you the exact tools that you'll need, especially to protect yourself. Is there a forum that kind of helps Malian reporters and journalists and others who want to report in Mali?
Bon, ma chance, c'est aussi le fait d'appartenir au consortium international des journalistes d'investigation qui est basé à Washington. Et aussi, j'appartiens à des organisations des journalistes d'investigation qui se partagent des outils. Et sans oublier qu'au niveau régional, nous avons, je suis membre du conseil d'administration de la cellule Norbert Zongo, qui réunit l'ensemble des journalistes d'investigation de l'Afrique de l'Ouest. Et donc, nous avons des cadres où nous échangeons sur la sécurité digitale, la sécurité physique des journalistes. Et c'est des outils autour de ces rencontres, nous avons des séances de partage d'outils, y compris les outils de la dernière génération, les outils les plus recommandés par les experts dans le domaine de la sécurité digitale, par exemple. Et voilà, je vais citer par exemple les techniques de sécurisation des mails, de cryptage des mails comme PJP, Proton Mail, et les échanges qu'on peut avoir via des mails. Et aussi par rapport à la sécurité physique, il y a un certain nombre de dispositifs qu'il faut réunir autour de soi. Vous voyez, si vous devez vous rendre en terrain difficile, vous voyez que vous ne pouvez pas porter, par exemple, n'importe quelle chaussure, vous ne pouvez pas porter n'importe quel arsenal. Tout cela, c'est vraiment... Et vous ne pouvez pas... J'étais dans l'obligation aussi de vous enturbaner, vous voyez, parce que c'est une localité où les gens ont cette culture du turban pour turbaner les visages et ça donne à cette population-là de trop se méfier, parce que quand vous ne mettez pas dans le pouvoir d'eux en termes d'information, donc il y a un certain nombre de dispositions qu'il fallait prendre. Bon, je dis, moi, ça m'a été facile parce que j'ai déjà bénéficié de pas mal d'outils pour vraiment faire face à des situations comme ça, mais ce n'était pas facile. Et le climat aussi, il est à l'extrême. C'est des zones où il fait extrêmement chaud et le soleil est insoutenable. Il faut psychologiquement se préparer à tout ça pour dire que le terrain n'est pas du tout facile. Ça n'a pas été facile pour moi et Moussa, mon collègue Moussa, parce que c'est vraiment le même climat et ça nous a valu une histoire de 6 mois sur ce sujet.
Okay, so I'd like to return a little bit to our other panelists, Mami. There is a question that came in from the audience, and someone is asking, where do you think international media fails in their efforts to cover terrorism in Mali?
Okay, international media. Well, it's a big fish for them. It's a big subject. Did they fail in covering? But
No,
it's a
where,
big part of their,
if at all, yeah, in their efforts. So what lets them down?
Yeah, in their effort. Yeah, but the thing is that when they cover, it helps showing a kind of image of the country. Like Mali is a poor country where you have terrorist attack. For example, when the Hotel Radisson was attacked in 2015, I think, people were scared. They were like calling from Europe, and how do you feel? Are you feeling good? Because the attack happened in the capital city. So when showing this, they would show like images of Bamako, images of the street, and it tends to change, the vision of our country. People will think, okay, what is happening in this country? Are they safe? They need to be very precise and very more accurate in the way they treat the information, I think. I would not say they failed, but there's a lot of some things to adjust in the covering.
Yes, that's quite fair. And I think the whole media fraternity, whether international or local, can also take note of that. And then someone also asked a question about training for international journalists. What would you tell us is on the ground? What's your experience with training for international journalists, especially?
Oh, to train, you mean international journalists on Mali? Or
No, local journalists on investigating terrorism and insurgency.
Yes, of course.
Giving tips and tricks, yeah.
Yes, like I said, David mentioned a bit some tricks, but I would like to mention another aspect. In training journalists, you have to take in consideration the gender issue. For example, you won't find a lot of women getting interested in this question on terrorism, because it would be hard for them to like going on the field. So you would have more men who are trained for that. And if they need to be trained, they need to take in account the security, I think, aspect, prevention aspect, security, how to secure yourself when you go on the ground. Like David said earlier, how are you going to dress? What car are you going to use? What are you gonna bring with you? I mean, there's a lot of things to take into consideration before getting into an investigation. Who are you facing? What are the group you're gonna investigate on? In what area are you going? Is it a dangerous area? We know that some area they can kidnap you, they can take you away. And it's not only white people, it's also African people. We have a lot of guides that have been kidnapped in the north of the country. So you could be a potential hostage for these groups. So you need to take into account the security. I think I would like to mention the UNESCO manual for journalists that was, I think it was edited in 2008. It's a manual for journalists facing terrorism. I think all journalists who wants to investigate should read this manual. It's available on the UNESCO United Nations Education for Science and Culture website. You can find it in a PDF version. It gives you tips and security measures to take if you want to go and investigate on terrorism and insurgency.
Okay, that's very helpful. And then I had another question where I also want to rally David in. If any of our audience members has a question that they wish to ask to our panelists, that is Mame Diarra Diop and David Debele, please do not hesitate to post it. I'll get the questions and comments later on. We have 16 minutes remaining on the clock. And I understand that David has set up sorry. Yeah, I understand that David has set up an organization for investigative journalists, and it's a trend that I'm seeing across the continent, which is coming up right now. Many journalists are making initiatives, which I believe is to cover the gap of traditional media, where we've initially ignored investigative journalism because it's expensive, it takes time. What do you think, in your prediction, is going to be the future of investigative journalism? Do you think we're going to have maybe more resources, more interest, more stories, or it's, just going to take time? In maybe 10 years, what do you predict? Mame, I'll start with you and then we'll go to David.
Well, I think the trend has already started. David is part of a big network of investigation journalism, and we have another one in reuniting East African journalists, taking like Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, and even Senegal, which is the line of the terrorist threats. So I think there will be more and more network in the future, but again and again, the basics are important in journalism, the basics. Accuracy, sources. I mean, journalists also, even if they want to train on terrorism, they need to not to forget the basics of journalism. And I think this trend is going to go bigger and bigger. And now there is also the financial question, because going on doing an investigation costs a lot of money. That's where the problem is. You need to find financing sources to be able to conduct. And I think there are. You just need to find those networks. I think the Senozo, which David is part of, is financing. There are some partners, international partners, which are interested in covering these questions. So journalists should just have the intelligence to go to those resources and find what they want and what they want to do.
David, would you like to share your thoughts on that?
Merci. Merci, Mam a parlé de beaucoup d'aspects qui sont vraiment pertinents. Vous voyez que dans le contexte qui est le nôtre, au Mali, dans la sous-région ouest africaine, l'avenir du journalisme, c'est vraiment l'investigation. Je pense que les médias commencent à le comprendre, les maisons de rédaction, même si ils n'y mettent pas assez de moyens, parce que l'un des problèmes fondamentaux au niveau des médias, que ce soit au Mali, ou au Niger, ou au Burkina, au Sénégal, c'est le fait qu'il n'y a pas de ligne budgétaire allouée à l'investigation. Et surtout quand vous voyez que vous vous rendez compte que l'investigation, vous l'avez rappelé, il prend du temps. Voilà, il faut y passer du temps, il faut voyager, il faut téléphoner, il faut échanger avec des gens, il faut réunir un minimum de sécurité autour de soi. C'est vraiment un investissement. Et la chance aujourd'hui, c'est quoi? La chance aujourd'hui, c'est que nous avons pas mal d'organisations qui sont en train d'être mises en place et qui assurent la promotion de ce genre journalistique-là. Et aussi, peut-être l'autre alternative, ce serait vraiment que les journalistes se donnent cette occasion d'intégrer ces réseaux, ces organisations pour pouvoir bénéficier de subventions pour traiter des sujets avec beaucoup de profondeur, parce que vous savez que c'est ce style, ce genre journalistique que le public aime, parce qu'il y a un traitement en profondeur de l'information et on va au-delà du factuel et on donne quelque chose de vraiment croustillant. Donc, il faut impérativement que les journalistes s'insèrent dans ce dispositif-là, d'aller vers des regroupements. Et moi, je vais juste au passage signaler que récemment, j'ai bénéficié d'une subvention de OSIWA via West University qui a financé une enquête transnationale que j'ai réalisée avec mon collègue journaliste Jacques Gorsa sur la problématique de l'eau à Falémé. On l'a fait là, on a publié l'enquête il y a seulement une semaine. Et c'est pour dire qu'il y a des organisations qui sont là, qui veulent aider les journalistes à faire de la bonne production. Donc, il nous faut, nous, journalistes, aller vers ces organisations-là. Et je félicite, je remercie Wits University pour son travail de promotion.
Okay, so David, in yes or no, do you think that the organizations that we are setting up for investigation are going to disrupt the way traditional media has been working? Are we going to see more investigations in maybe 10, 15, 20 years to come?
Non, pas du tout, pas du tout. Je pense qu'elles sont d'ailleurs la solution, une solution au problème. Parce que le problème de financement est un problème réel dans les actions.
Yeah, oh, the question was disruptive. In other words, changing and bringing something better, not disturbing.
Donc, je pense que
est-ce que ça va donner quelque chose de mieux?
Oui, ça va franchement impacter positivement sur l'activité, sur le travail des journalistes, ça va les rassurer davantage, ça va les encourager surtout à aller dans des sujets difficiles, des sujets d'intérêt public difficiles.
Okay, no worries, Sarah. I'll go back to Mami and ask the question. The takeaway that I've got so far is you mentioned that we need to be very accurate, even as we do investigations, which is, of course, very important and basic. And then about Mali and the Sahel region, we need to have sources and very, very good sources because of the difficulty in attaining information. For someone who has not reported from French-speaking Africa, you may not understand how difficult it is to attain information. And that's why this has to be stressed. And also a very almost obvious, but obvious situation is about the climate or the weather. Because it's a desert, it's very hot, and it may be a very harsh place to work in if you're not really ready, if you don't hydrate, if you don't cover yourself. And then the financial question, and also building very key networks that will help. And now, because we are covering a very sensitive and important topic, I wonder if you get in trouble, if you're kidnapped, if you're threatened, are there people who help journalists where someone can go to and maybe they get bailed out, or if anything happens and threatens their life? Are there organizations, are there lawyers, are there societies that are helping journalists in Mali?
Yes, there are organizations because it happens that journalists were kidnapped in the north of the country, in region like Timbuktu. Some radio host animators were threatened or insulted or called, or it happens. We have like La Maison de la Presse, which really is very dynamic when something happens to a journalist. We also have Reporters Sans Frontières, which is very, very active in Mali. And we have other press organizations that would probably make a lot of noise if it happens. Unfortunately, it's always, the problem is I think around the authorities. Usually when journalists are kidnapped or harassed or whatever, the authorities doesn't speak, they don't do anything. So it all lies on the press organization and the international organization like Reporters Sans Frontières, which are very doing some lobbying to get awareness on it. So yes, you might need some help, but will it be enough to make you free? Actually, what happens to that political man is a good example, because not only politicians, but also press people did a lot of lobby to get him freed. Every day there were messages on TV, on the newspaper, on internet to get him freed. Are we going to have the same for a journalist? It depends on how important you are, actually.
Oh dear, that's quite sad. I wonder if we still have David. We have not got so many questions from the audience.
Amelia, if you mind, yes, I wanted to add something to what David said earlier about investigation on terrorists. I think the time aspect is very important. Take your time to do a good investigation. It takes a lot of time. And I would even say, why won't journalists write books? We were supposed to have in this panel, I think Serge Daniel, he wrote a lot of books on terrorism. It's important that journalists not only do articles or news report, but why not writing books on this issue. There's a lot of stories to be told about this subject, especially in the north of the country. Why young people in the north go into insurgent or terrorist movement. There's a lot to write about it.
Okay, thank you very much. In closing, we have 5 minutes, actually 6 minutes and a few seconds to go. I would actually enjoy books. I've read some, of course, books that have been written by journalists, and it goes a long way in covering different subjects. And I would really be interested in reading some of those. I appreciate the Africa Macracking book that had been, some of the stories that were compiled by AIJC. At least it gives an idea of what's happening in the region. I'd like to hear from David in closing, just to share briefly. You've shared sources of where we can go in case you're in need of help. If David could also add some of the resources that at least someone should have before going to the field, so that you know if anything happens to you, I'll call so and so, I'll speak to so and so, and maybe I could even if I'm maybe not so big, but they can help me.
D'accord. Oui, merci. C'est une question très importante, essentielle d'ailleurs. Hein. Vous savez que la question de la sécurité du journaliste est à la base de la démobilisation même des journalistes. Les journalistes ne se sentent pas en sécurité. Vous avez peut-être un cas par le passé, c'était pas sur le terrorisme, un confrère qui est porté disparu depuis un certain temps, on ne sait pas où est-ce qu'il est. On a eu des indices, mais la question de la sécurité des journalistes. Et il y a une semaine, j'étais au centre du Mali, à Mopti, où les journalistes, ils ont l'info, mais ils ont peur de relayer parce qu'ils ont peur de se faire embarquer par tel ou tel courant djihadiste. Vous voyez que le phénomène s'est déplacé au centre du Mali. Donc, la question de la sécurité des journalistes est centrale. Et donc, ça fait que les journalistes n'arrivent même pas, l'État n'arrive pas à assurer la sécurité de la population, du citoyen lambda, y compris les journalistes. Donc, je pense que les organisations que Maman a citées, Reporters sans frontières, il faut ajouter les organisations de défense des droits humains comme Amnesty, comme l'AMDA, l'Association malienne des droits de l'homme. Moi, j'ai eu à contacter ces organisations par le passé sur certains sujets que je traitais, que je recevais des menaces directes, hein, et souvent des menaces déguisées qui arrivent sous forme d'appels masqués, vous voyez, et on vous menace directement. Et souvent, j'ai été amené à transmettre ces audios à la justice pour que les actifs soient informés de ce qui se passe autour de moi. Donc, la question de la sécurité, elle est centrale. Donc, je pense que nous, journalistes, on a pas mal de possibilités pour partager les soucis qu'on a, mais nous sommes dans un état où voilà, la sécurité ne semble pas être la priorité, la sécurité du citoyen, du journaliste, ne semble pas être vraiment la sécurité. Parce que même en fonction de l'île, on peut subir des menaces et se faire enlever. Voilà.
Okay, thank you very much. We have 1 minute to go, and I wish you could give me 5 topics that need to be investigated around terrorism and insurgency. If you can just name very quickly. Mame had mentioned something about girls. So David, I'll just start with you very quickly. 5 topics around terrorism and insurgency in Mali that should be investigated. Quickly, we have 1 minute. Okay, I'm not hearing from David. Should I go to you, Mame, to give us 5 topics that should be investigated around terrorism and insurgency?
Well, as you mentioned earlier, you say impact of climate change on this movement, conflicts in between local communities. How did this impact life of people in the north, families, women? How can women face this subject? And I don't know, 5 topics. Well, I think that's what I'm thinking of now. Social impact of this.
Okay, thank you very much. Our 1 minute is done. And I'd like to thank everyone who has stayed with us until the end. Thank you, David, for joining us. Thank you very much, Mami, also for being present. We just have 41 seconds. So thank you and enjoy the rest of the sessions. I am Amelia Martha Nashtimbo, and goodbye.